So today I wanted to vlog about Dr. Harlan Lane. He's an author of the book Mask of Benevolence. He talks about oppression and control. It's a very good book. Part 4, and it's language, bigotry, and the deaf community. And honestly, I've fallen behind a little bit about discussing this because it's a very impactful book. Talks about depression, and it's amazing. It's very impactful. And it talks about the deaf experience in the Milan Conference in Italy. In the 1880s, they thought the best way to teach would be oralism. And our history has changed a lot. And it's kind of hard to vlog about that. And it's important to know where we were in the past, how we became where we are now, and then how our future is going to be. If you don't study history, it will repeat itself. That's just the way it is. So many various countries are more open to various languages, and some countries are more strong on their traditional and stick to one language. But what often happens is the minority group, their language is ignored and oppressed, and the majority culture and language is pushed on them. So an example is the Indians. Their language, it was a minority language, and eventually it got ruined and ripped away from them and oppressed, and so the language eventually died out. And that's generally what happens to those kinds of minority languages. One example that was given is about culture and language and how it's ripped away from people, and they usually punish people when they speak their own language. Cesar Chavez, he was a Hispanic American leader. He spoke Spanish, and if you spoke Spanish in an English school, they would take a ruler and whip your hands with them. And another thing, if you spoke Spanish again, after they had whipped you with the ruler in your hands, they'd take a wooden paddle and spank your butt. That was a long time ago, but now we are generally more accepting to other languages. But it's interesting how they did the same thing to deaf people as well. It's an interesting comparison. Lane offered various examples about minority groups and how they are oppressed, and how sometimes they feel embarrassed and people are negative, and especially with the minority language. There is an advocate from France. His name was Francois Grosjean, and he, Gallaudet recently made a deaf study, and it's a magazine, and it's a very great article, and here's the link below. It's about the right of deaf children and various language. That's also offered in various languages. Francois Grosjean, he explains what happens when you continue to punish and be negative towards children, and when they don't get to use their natural language, and what happens to them. There's 4 points I'd like to talk about. One is they cannot develop the right skills if they don't first have their own language developed. And he had the sink or swim method. And it's either you learn it or you don't, and you fail, and that's it. There's no communication, there's no gesturing. There's just, you fail or you don't. The book offered different examples. This one was in France. The teacher would write a sentence on the board, and she would go around the rooms asking them what it says, and the children would go up behind her, and then she would say, okay, well, now what's this mean? and she wanted them to understand what they what it says and what it means, and wants them to be able to speak it and understand it, the whole thing, and make sure it made sense to them. And that's the sink or swim method. And if they're good at speaking, they usually don't understand what it means. So there's that. He also talked about the sink or swim method with children and various different languages and people with different backgrounds as well. You either fail or you improve and develop, especially in language. Or you just don't develop at all and your skills decrease. Or you kind of feel insecure. A lot of the people felt insecure. They continued to guess and just assume what was going on. And also negative attitudes towards the language. That's another point. And they would reject other languages. And lastly, they would have a negative attitude about minority cultures. They would look down upon it. And then they'd start looking down upon other cultures as well. And everyone would just take that in. So those were those points. If the majority culture was educated in their natural language and educated by using that, they would be good in school. They would develop skills. And instead of mainstreaming them and assimilating them, just putting them in a different environment, telling them to sink or swim, they're not going to be successful. A lot of people that have experienced that have not been successful. And it all depends on how you're teaching them. And the minority language, they generally advance in their own language. And they all learn in different ways. And they will develop if they learn in their natural language. But telling someone to sink or swim, it doesn't generally work. The majority culture does not try and teach their culture to the minority, and vice versa. The minority culture wants to be like the majority culture and try and catch up and become that majority. They don't defend their minority because they may not be well educated or can't find jobs or can't keep jobs. And usually that lower percent, the majority culture just kind of wants them to go away. They don't want to support that minority. They might not be able to advocate for themselves and stand up and defend themselves. They try to keep a low profile. And the majority controls them pretty much by that. And everyone controls through language. So this is a deaf man himself. It's a quote from him. He's an author, and he was forced to learn English. His name's Albert Ballin. So Ballin himself shows that teaching English is very forceful, and they teach just words, and then speaking those words, and then oralism and autism. Oh my gosh, there's so many things. It becomes very frustrating and overwhelming. Ballin explains that he was not the first to explain this. In our past, it has been explained as well in different French books, different French authors, and in some of those books, they've showed that gestures work well, and those concepts will stick with the students. Pierre Dessalognes, he's a wonderful author. He wrote a book about many various different things in about 1779. He talked about the deaf language and supported that.